Hello, this is David Braun, and I wanted to give you another preview of the book I'm finishing up called The Valuation Analyst: New Perspectives in Extracting and Applying Adjustment Rates. And yes, this is an advertisement, but I'm going to give you some information so you may enjoy it. What we're looking at here is using paired sales to extract the trend in values over time. And what I have set up here, and I'll explain this picture in a few minutes. What I have set up here is a property, to make it easy, 100,000 is a property's intrinsic value. Now that means it's real value, and it's not really something that we use in appraisal practice, but it's something that we use, model builders might use. Now, what we know is if it sells and it's in a perfect market and it's worth 100,000, it will sell for 100,000, let's say on May 15th. But we know real property markets are not perfect. I'm going to put in here a range of value, or a market randomness, we might call it. I call it random variance. Let's say a minus 5% to a 5%. So if a market can vary plus or minus 5% for no reason, then when it sells in May, it could sell for 103. Anywhere would be from 95 to 105. I can click this. I've set this up with a little formula in Excel called a rand between. And so I've got it plus or minus 5%. Now, why would a market have this randomness? I wrote down a few things. Of course, the number one thing that appraisers think of, it's the illogical behavior of buyers and sellers. Maybe somebody lived in a house when they were young and it was a greenhouse and had a little white picket fence. Sometime after that, mom and dad divorced and they moved, and now they feel like if they could get that greenhouse and white picket fence, they go back to happiness. This kind of things that only the individual knows why, but to analysts and to appraisers, we don't understand it. It's a logical behavior to us. Sometimes they have wrong information. They studied some other listings, but the other listings they looked at, or the other sales they looked at that the buyer and seller looked at, they were bigger or smaller or older, worse condition. There could be, for appraisers, we see that bad data all the time. Could be, for appraisers, could be poor model fit. In other words, what we're doing is just not right, and we just can't explain part of it. So that's kind of what your randomness is in a market. Now, to people like me that try to figure out how can we extract adjustment rates in an objective manner the best we can, randomness is probably the number one issue we deal with, and we're going to see why here with paired sales. Now, this is going to be a sale resale of the same house. So I'm going to come here and open up, so unhide these rows. And what we have is, in May, the house sells for, in 2015, it sells for 102. In May of 16, it might just sell for 105. Now, where does this 105 comes from? We talked about the 102. It's the same thing. It's just plus or minus 5% randomly. Okay. Now, if it was a perfect market and zero randomness, and we clicked, you see it would be 100,000 all the way through. All right. So let's put back the minus 5% and 5%. And this is where the appraiser usually ends up. The appraiser goes, wow, I found a house that sold in my market and resold a year later without major renovations or anything, just normal upkeep. Now let's see what it would give. Okay, now just by chance, now what kind of market did we define here? We defined a stable market because everything should be 100,000 intrinsic value here, 100,000 intrinsic value here, and then that's the way we've set this up. We're in control. So when we made up this hypothetical market or virtual market, we defined it that way. So we know the real answer down here, change in value, should be 0, but it gave 4%. Now let's look at, maybe you find another pair of sales of a sale resale. This time it says it's a -1. Okay, so you write that up in your appraisal report. You show one is a 4, one is a -1. You find one more set. Okay, I'll click and it'll scatter it. It's 3. Okay, so it's going to give us different amounts, but it should be 0. But when you run these paired sales, there's -1. There's not. Gosh, there's one that says 9% appreciation. So what are we really looking at here? Well, this is really the truth, that the problem with paired sales. It's not, appraisers say, well, I've tried to run paired sales, I'm not happy. We almost all appraisers have run these, and we're not happy unless it kind of supports what we were thinking anyway. So if I thought it was worth, that the market was appreciating at 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9%, this is the paired sale I would include in it. I'd include this set of paired sales. I might not include, if I think it's 7, I'm probably not going to include this paired sales that just randomly came up a minus almost 5%. Now, what does this tell us? Well, number one is it tells us that paired sales analysis, or matched paired sales, and this was a very good match. I always call it paired sales analysis. It really matched paired sale, or matched paired analysis. And it is extremely susceptible to the randomness in a market. That's what that tells us, because in this case, the houses were perfect. Imagine getting a pair of sales and you had to adjust one down for size, one up for age, one for bedrooms. It would even be worse. Now, the other thing is, most markets are worse than a plus or minus 5% in variance. I would say probably most markets are from plus or minus 8%, which would even be worse. So this turned out to be a nightmare, but this is the problem with paired sales analysis, and this is really the reason you don't use it in your report so much. Now, the purpose of what we're doing here, and the purpose of the book, is so you could explain that. As an appraiser, what we want to do is we want to shift over our skill set to be an analyst. We want to become valuation analysts. Now, we don't want to become a statistician. We don't have to become a statistician. We're going to be between what we've been as an appraiser and what a statistician is, and we're going to become valuation analysts, and we're going to be able to explain to the users of our reports why we're not going to include maybe a paired sales analysis while we're trying to extract the trend in market value. Now, I introduced in a seminar that I wrote for McKissick Real Estate School. I have a lot of appraisal classes, and I did a seminar for them that was called Fundamentals of Analysis, and we talk about this in that. But I presented in there a principle that I called a principle of conflicting outputs. Now, what that means is that when we run an analysis, and we know as valuation analysts, we know about this thing we call randomness or random variation, we expect our outputs to sometimes conflict with each other. The appraiser has to be smart enough and understand analysis well enough to work our way through it. Now, that leads to what's the difference in support and evidence. Support is when you have preconceived idea and then you try to support it. For example, if you turned in your appraisal that the market was actually appreciating at but changing at a negative rate, and you could pull some, let's say I'm going to click the button and we'll set up an example of a paired sales you might find. If the underwriter calls you back and says, can you give us some more support for your minus 3%? Well, you might not include that paired sales. And if you could find another paired sales, you certainly wouldn't include that one. It's 10.5. Here's one. This is the paired sales you would send back to them. You see, that's support. Now, that's not a good appraisal practice, but if the underwriter asks for support, that's support. Technically, you should have, if they wanted, the underwriter should ask for more evidence, and you should have sent all three of those in and then explained why you thought it was a negative. Now, I told you I'd tell you about Bart. I call this little guy Bart. Now, he ties in with this principle that's called principle of conflicting outputs, and I call him as a reminder of what I call the Bartholomew principle. Now, if you look at this little fella, he's apparently been to a party, and he's obviously pretty looped here. and he's about to fall, so he's grabbed hold of this lamppost. So here is the BART principle, and it says that appraisers often use analysis much like a drunk uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination. So this is a little preview of what's in the book. This is the kind of thing we want to do. We don't want to talk too subjectively. We want to put out these mathematical examples that the appraiser can actually say, I know why paired sales don't work. I can explain it to you. Give me a pencil and a piece of paper. This is what's going to be in the book, The Valuation Analyst, New Perspectives in Extracting and Applying Adjustment Rates. And I think in my last post, I said it would be done in April. Actually, my part of the book will be done in April, but it's probably going to be May before it will be up for sale. Thank you very much.